Getting started with digital transformations in 2025, Microsoft's plan to invest $80 billion in AI-enabled data centers, and the up-and-coming ERP software vendors that you need to know about. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 204, Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 204. My name is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. This is the podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation, including strategy, people, process, technology, and everything else you need to know about digital transformations and ERP projects. With me joining, as always, as our co-host is Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, and thanks to the audience for being here. This is a show that is produced by Major Tom Productions, sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group. We publish new episodes every week, every Wednesday. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com and see all the episodes you may have missed, as well as keep up with new episodes. You can also subscribe to it either at transformationgroundcontrol.com, or you can go to wherever you listen to or watch podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff. So be sure to check us out there. Great show for you coming up today. We've got, first of all, we're going to get into some newsworthy topics to start things off. We're going to talk about OpenAI. Well, if I could talk, that'd be good too. But we're going to talk about OpenAI's latest model and how it's passed a key AGI test. We'll talk about Microsoft's plan to invest $80 billion in AI-enabled data centers. We're going to get to some social media questions as well in this opening segment. And then later in the show, we'll talk about getting started with digital transformations in 2025, what you need to do to be thinking about getting started for your new digital technology initiatives here in the new year. And joining me for that discussion will be Greg Benton from Third Stage Consulting. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at our company. And then last but not least, later in the show, after Greg is on, we'll talk about the up-and-coming ERP software vendors that you might want to know about. These are 5 ERP software vendors that aren't household names, but they're up-and-coming vendors that you might want to be aware of or have on your radar in 2025. So before we get to all that good stuff, though, what kind of social media questions have we gotten here in the recent days and weeks, Darian?
Yeah, since we've taken a little Christmas and New Year break, we have some good social media questions that have been piling up. So I grabbed a couple. This first one is, what are your thoughts about AI agents taking over the most of the simplistic functions that ERP is often used for? In other words, is there a future for ERP systems the way they are now? My hope and expectation is that most ERP systems functionality will be replaced with AI agents sooner than later.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think on the front end of ERP systems, in terms of queries and running reports and looking for information in the ERP system, I think that's where AI agents can certainly take the load off and replace some of that inefficiency there. But I do think ERP is still going to have value in terms of having a common database, a common set of processes, common workflows, all that stuff. So I think there'll be a role for ERP still, even with AI, and add to the fact that ERP vendors are investing heavily in AI to try and speed up or fast track some of this evolution of AI that this listener is referring to. So I think the ERP systems in the world are going to change dramatically, but I think there's still going to be a strong market for them, because companies, at the end of the day, they don't want the disparate systems and all the legacy old technologies, the old data, the dirty data, all that stuff. They can't have that flawed back office model and put AI on top of it. You have to do both. If you want to take full advantage of AI agents, then you need something in the back office to house that data and the workflows and the transactions that go along with that. And so that's, I think, the role that ERP might play more resoundingly in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like on here, we often hear about the current ERP vendors that are investing heavily or adding AI to their systems. Could that make this happen faster? What systems do you see implementing this quickly?
I mean, they're all, I mean, a better question might be who's not, because it's because they're all, I mean, all the big ones, all the major players. If you look at the top 7 or 10 ERP vendors in the market, they're all investing heavily in AI right now, and it almost feels like kind of like a nuclear arms race. Like they're all racing to be the the biggest and the best in terms of baking AI into their systems. So I think that's good. I mean, I think it creates a lot of innovation, and it minimizes the need to necessarily go out and look for multiple systems to do different things. So I think they're all doing it, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll go to the next question then. This one is, could you please explain the difference between an implementation readiness plan and adoption/change management? They seem quite similar.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd say implementation readiness is a bit broader. And so when we talk about implementation readiness, it's going to include change management and change readiness, but it's not limited to that. When you talk about implementation readiness, you're also looking at your business processes. You're looking at, integration between systems. You're looking at your data, the cleanliness of the data, et cetera. You're looking at the governance that you're going to have in place after go live. The benefits realization plan, the user adoption testing plans, all that stuff. So implementation readiness is all encompassing, but when you get into change management or user adoption and things like that, those are more specific segments within an overarching implementation readiness or phase 0 sort of a plan.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, some great questions. I'm sure next week we will have some more great questions from our audience as well. Like we said, taking that little break, I feel like we have a lot of questions to catch up on.
Yeah, and that last question, we're going to actually unpack quite a bit with our guests later, because we're going to talk about implementation readiness and phase 0 and getting ready for digital transformation in the new year. So stay tuned, whoever was listening or whoever asked that question, and whoever's interested in that question, stay tuned, because our guest here in a few minutes will dive into that in a lot more detail.
Yeah, but before that, we're going to dive into our 2 newsworthy articles of the day. This first one is all about OpenAI. So it's about OpenAI's latest model, O3, and it has passed a key AGI test, showing it can outperform most humans in specific tasks. This milestone brings OpenAI closer to artificial general intelligence, where AI can perform complex tasks autonomously. Now, OpenAI is setting its sights on superintelligence AI systems that far exceed human capabilities. While it is still a few years off, OpenAI is pushing forward with safety measures to ensure responsible development. But this is obviously a huge step in the world of AI and development of AI. With this, Eric, what are your thoughts on OpenAI's O3 model passing the ARC AGI test? And how do you think this is a breakthrough in AGI that will affect ERP systems in the near future? I guess 2 kind of questions there.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a big milestone that can only help the adoption of OpenAI. At the same time, though, I mean, I've been impressed with how much it's improved even before this new release, which I have not tried yet. So I'm not familiar with it myself. But even prior to that, though, even not having been on that newest version, I felt like it's come a long ways. But obviously, they've got further to go. If there's further certifications or approvals, there's sort of or milestones they're reaching. So I think that's a good thing. I think with ERP, though, too, same thing. I mean, I think if we can start to figure out how to leverage OpenAI and the data and the intelligence that's already been built outside of a core ERP system. If you look to more of the OpenAI models or the OpenAI model, that's a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of intelligence, that if we can merge that with our internal AI initiatives and our internal data sets, I mean, that's where I think the real power comes in. If you think about something like think of a food manufacturer, for example, someone that manufactures food globally, and they're trying to forecast demand. In the past, they might have focused on their internal data and trends to figure out what the future demand might be, so that they can plan their production and their procurement of raw materials and hiring and staffing and all that stuff. And so it worked okay, but there's a lot of external factors that influence what's going to happen with food demand for food. It could be seasonal, it could be geopolitical, it could be economical, or not economical, but economic trends and whatnot. So a lot of external factors could influence something as simple as a demand forecast, a customer demand forecast for a food manufacturer in this example. So I think with having OpenAI, increase adoption, increase its own intelligence, if we can merge that with our internal data and be able to use that more intelligently like that, I think that can be super powerful and a real game changer for a lot of companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point of you've already been impressed before this new model has been out or used. I mean, if we even compare it to the start of 2024 to now the start of 2025, I think the model has changed so much throughout the year, and we've really seen that its capabilities change like right in front of our eyes. So I feel like, and it's only going to get faster, right? The more data it has. So within 2025, how much faster will it change and how much better will it get, I think will be really interesting. But with that, with OpenAI now focusing on super intelligence, how do you see super intelligent AI influencing ERP development and decision-making processes for businesses?
Well, I think you mean for the development of the actual software, or the way that companies deploy?
Maybe the way that the companies deploy software.
Yeah. Well, I think for sure, AI will help tremendously. It's already helping software vendors tremendously in development because, they can speed up development and the cycle times. But I think, even for a company that's deploying packaged software, off-the-shelf software, like an ERP system, you can use OpenAI or AI in general can help with a lot of the mundane, time-intensive tasks that happen on a transformation project. So you think of something like data migration, data cleansing, being able to cleanse data, for example. I mean, you can use AI to help you sort through and eliminate duplicates or misclassified data or whatever. You can use AI for stuff like that in the past was a very manual, time-intensive process. There's other things too, like with the configuration or any sort of custom code that you might have to develop or add on to an ERP system. You could be using AI for that. So I think it's an opportunity to really speed up some of those mundane tasks that in the past we might have just offshored to a lower cost country outside of our own. But now that eliminates or minimizes that potential need now to where you can be using AI to do some of that work that you might have offshored in the past.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I want to talk about is, AI in the workforce. So with, AGI can potentially disrupt the workforce. How might ERP systems evolve to support new business structures or workflows as roles and responsibilities change due to AI-driven automation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me think through this. So I think that, first of all, I think you have to think about how are you going to structure yourself as an organization going forward? Sort of thinking in the future, do you want to have like if you don't already have it, do you want to have a chief AI officer or an AI subject matter expert on your project team, but also organizationally longer term? Is that going to be a permanent role within your IT department potentially? So you want to think about, how AI, not just as a tool set, you can embed that into your implementation in your organization, but also organizationally, how do we build the competency and the focus on AI? So I think those, I don't know if that's getting to what you're trying to get answered there, but that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like obviously a lot of people are concerned, like what is my role going to be taken by AI? Am I going to have a job anymore? How can people, ready themselves for AI coming in? How can they learn to use AI to automate their tasks, and maybe provide more value to their business they're working for?
Yeah. Well, I think, just testing it out in your own personal life is a good place to start. I mean, that's kind of how I've gotten more and more comfortable with AI is I'll use it to have conversations, or if I'm doing research, or just even if it's something that I'm just trying to learn more about, I might use AI to just ask it questions and prompt it in different ways. And then you start to learn how to teach AI what you're looking for, or how to format things that you're looking for, or things of that nature. So I think if you just try it out, like on a small scale, it'll give you, it kind of opens up your own creativity to how you might use AI in your personal life as well as in the workplace as well in your business. So, I'm always trying to, every week or so, I'm trying to find new ways to use AI to just help me be more effective. Like, for example, the one little one that it took me a while to figure out, but I was kicking myself for not thinking of it sooner, was when we have podcast guests. I used to write up 10 to 15 questions, and I think through it. It would take me, 30 minutes or so that a couple days before a podcast guest was going to be on the show, so I could share the questions with the guests, so they kind of knew in advance what I was going to ask. I still do that, but now I just use AI for it. I just tell AI, like, I'm going to have this guest. I might even put in the LinkedIn profile of the guest, and I'll say, they're an expert in whatever, can create some questions around this thread, and it'll create a list of questions, and I'll pick the ones I like the best and then fire it off. So it, say it went from, say, me taking 30 minutes or so to prep for a podcast interview to, 5 minutes or less now. So anyway, but that's just one small example of how I've, just sort of stumbled into things and tried different ways of using AI to make myself more effective and efficient. So I think that's what you have to do, is just, it's really cool because it's so limitless. It's unlimited potential with what you can do. So it's really just limited by your creativity and your own ideas on how you might use it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really great advice for anybody out there that's looking to understand AI in a better way or use AI for their job or in their life, like you said. But speaking of all this AI, there's got to be somewhere to store all of the data for AI. So that's what our next article is all about. It's this article discusses Microsoft's plan to invest $80 billion in AI-enabled data centers during fiscal 2025. This investment will primarily focus on building data centers to support AI model training and cloud-based AI applications. A significant portion of the funding will go towards centers in the U.S. Microsoft President Brad Smith emphasized the potential for AI to drive economic growth in the U.S., linking it to the impact of electricity. This article also highlights the high cost of building AI data centers, which require advanced infrastructure like liquid cooling and high power capacities. Geez, talking today is hard.
We're both having trouble.
Yeah, Microsoft is obviously competing with other tech giants like AWS, Google, and Meta, who are also ramping up their investments in AI infrastructure to grow the growing demand or to meet the growing demand for generative AI and other large language models. So, Eric, with this, if you got that through my stumbling, what are your thoughts on Microsoft's $80 billion investment in AI-enabled data centers, and how do you think this will impact the cloud and AI services industry?
Well, I think it's going to certainly help, and it sounds like it's needed. It's fascinating to me, though, as you were talking, and we've talked about it, I think, in this podcast in the past as well. But just one of the most fascinating things about AI is the impact it's having on infrastructure, like IT infrastructure, and the demand it's placing on data centers, and also even just power grids throughout the world. I think it's really interesting to watch. I'll be curious to see how long term, how it affects power consumption in data centers and that sort of thing. Because I think it's an exponential hockey stick growth sort of thing where, as more and more people start using AI and they expand their use of AI, like we were just talking about, that just puts more and more pressure on companies like Microsoft to be able to have the infrastructure to support it on the back end. So I think it's fascinating. I don't think it's good or bad necessarily. I mean, I guess it's good that Microsoft's investing and trying to keep up with soaring demand for computing power. But I think the next domino to fall potentially will be somewhere in the world. There's probably going to be some pressure on a power grid that maybe can't sustain, the consumption that comes along with that. And then, of course, there's like the environmental thing too. Like, is there an environmental impact? I would assume there is if we're using more and more power and computing power to create this AI enabled stuff. How does that affect climate change and the environment, that sort of thing? So a lot to think about there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of unknowns that come with this as well. But with that, do you think that businesses like your business or other businesses should consider these investments when planning their own AI and cloud strategies?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's, I'm usually not an advocate or I'm usually not biased towards big technology companies. In fact, if I do have a bias, it might be against big technology companies oftentimes, because I like to see innovation and people that have options in the market. And you never want to see like one big player sort of dominate everything, especially in the enterprise tech space where there's just so many good options out there if you're looking for like an ERP or a CRM system or whatever. But in the case of AI and the scale that's required to make AI work, I think there's a pretty significant advantage that the big tech companies have, and rightfully so. Most startups couldn't invest what Microsoft just did in that data center and that computing power that they need. So I think not only in terms of financial resources, it's helpful because you need a company that can invest heavily in building out the infrastructure required to support AI. But also when you look at like the intelligence of AI, it thrives on information and learning. So a big company like Microsoft with that kind of scale is just going to have more data that it can draw from to teach AI models. So it's going to give an advantage to a company like Microsoft that has that sort of scale. So I think the big tech companies are at a pretty significant advantage, in my opinion, when it comes to all this.
Yeah, definitely. One question I have with this is, as Microsoft and other tech giants invest heavily in AI data centers, how do you anticipate this will affect digital transformation strategies for industries relying on legacy systems?
Well, I think in general, it's just going to put a lot of pressure on skills, which could be a good thing if you're a worker looking for work, or if you're just entering your career now, and if you're in technology and AI and data science in particular, those are really hot areas to be in right now. There's going to be soaring demand for those skills. But if you're an organization that is either a technology company that creates technology, or if you're a company that's going to deploy technology in their organizations, finding the skills, I think, is going to get harder and harder. I think the demand is just going to be so great, and the supply is probably not going to keep up. So good news for workers, and good news for college grads or people that are getting into their careers now. I'd highly recommend looking at technology, because I think there's going to be shortages in that area. But that's bad news for businesses that are trying to navigate all that.
Yeah, definitely. And one last question. How do you think this investment by Microsoft will influence the competitive landscape for AI solutions in sectors like healthcare, finance, and retail?
Yeah, great question. Well, again, I think what Microsoft is doing in a lot of ways is they're creating higher barriers to entry for other potential competitors, because, again, the financial resources are so great. They've already invested so heavily in their infrastructure. The data and the learning that they've already built with their AI models is so great. But as far as like looking at specific sectors and how that might affect them, I think that's the beauty of scale with Microsoft and other big tech providers, is they have so much data, so much information, that then they can more realistically break down some of that data and some of the learning and the intelligence, the artificial intelligence, into ways that can be specific to certain industries and that sort of thing. So I think it'll help in different segments for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, some interesting things to think about with the articles today, but I'm excited to dive into this interview with Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have Greg Benton on here to talk about how to get ready for digital transformations in 2025. So a lot of times companies in the new year are getting started on new initiatives because they've got new budgets, or it's a new fiscal year, or they're just energized after having a few weeks off during the holidays, whatever the case may be. But it begs the question: well, how do we get started? I mean, we don't want to just go start doing stuff. How do we get started? How do we plan for the year? How do we lay out our roadmap? All that stuff. So we're going to have Greg Benton on the show, who is our Chief Strategy Officer here at Third Stage Consulting. He's going to be on the show to talk about that with us. And then later in the show, we're going to talk about some of the up-and-coming ERP systems that you should be aware of. So be sure to stick around for that. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll bring Greg on the show to talk about how to plan for digital transformations in 2025. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well.
So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control episode number 204. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And you can also see the past episodes of this show at transformationgroundcontrol.com as well. You can also subscribe at that same website. And also, this show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, which is an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach the third stage of digital transformation success. If you're looking for help with your digital transformation, feel free to reach out to either Darian and I. I've included our contact information below, as well as other resources from our website that might help you throughout your digital transformation journey. So be sure to reach out to us and or download some of the free stuff we've included in the links for this podcast episode below. And this show is produced by Major Tom Productions, so thanks for being here. So excited for our guest here today. He's not a first-time guest by any means. He might be the most frequent guest we've had on the show, other than you and I, Darian. He's been on here several times before. His name's Greg Benton. He's our Chief Strategy Officer at Third Stage Consulting. Wanted to have him on the show, partially because he is a very knowledgeable person. He knows this industry really well, but he's also the one that leads the charge with our new clients as far as meeting with and understanding and crafting service offerings that will help our clients. And so he's really on the front end of a lot of organizations and executive teams that are getting started on their digital transformation journeys. So we thought it'd be great to have him on the show to share his insights into how to think about planning for new digital transformation initiatives in 2025 in the new year. So with that all being said, Greg, thanks for being here today.
Eric, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And this is our, I think, third year in a row that we're doing the kind of New Year's Eve, or excuse me, the New Year's report. Yeah. So, looking forward to a great conversation, looking forward to interacting with everybody who's all over the globe, finding out about what your digital transformation expectations are for 2025, and, how we can help each other as a community move forward in that way.
Yeah, so, absolutely. And
great to be with you.
Yeah. And you've been on this podcast several times now, not only for the New Year type edition, which I think, we always want to start the podcast off on a great note. And it's always, you're a perfect guest for that, to get us started on a positive note every year. So thanks for being here again at the start of this year. But for those that don't know you, maybe they haven't seen you on this podcast before. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, what led you to Third Stage Consulting and what you do at Third Stage?
For about the last 25 years, I've been working with enterprise applications and developing strategies and deployments of ERP systems, the whole realm of digital transformation initiatives. And in all of that time, we've seen a number of advances happen within the marketplace, a lot of changes happening with ERP systems, with the advent of AI, with, the move to the cloud, even, 15, 20 years ago. And in all of that time, there was really just kind of a missing component. And that was, how do organizations that are planning on embarking on this entire journey ensure that they're going to be successful throughout the journey, without having to really just take the gloves off and jump right in. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about today, is how do you prepare the organization? What do you look for up front to make sure that you don't fall into what the analysts say is about a 70% chance of failure in an ERP implementation, right? And it's not just about ERP anymore. It's about all those surrounding edge solutions and everything that runs your business, that makes up your digital enterprise operations, that makes up, everything that you need to be for the next 5 to 20 years. So that's where I think that third stage, and the reason why I'm here, really just is pulling the blanket off of what do we need to do up front? How do we need to approach it? How do we need to be successful in this all the way through as an organization? That's the thing that I love about our business and our firm.
Yeah, absolutely. Is our help guide those companies that are getting started on their projects and help them navigate it in a way that's smart. And when you look at where a lot of organizations are right now as we enter 2025, a lot of them have new fiscal year budgets. A lot of them have new initiatives they're getting started on. A lot of them are sort of regaining momentum after having a few weeks of holidays and other stuff sort of slowing down work activity. So a lot of times January is the time a lot of companies are ready to jump in and start doing stuff, and it can be daunting. So we want to talk about what stuff should you be doing and how should we get started, and how can we sort of not boil the ocean, but get started, incrementally in a way that's sort of aligned with what you're trying to accomplish as an organization.
In the U.S., we have a new president coming into office.
Yeah. That changes things for a lot of organizations, or it sort of changes the way they think about their strategy or their approach going forward. There's obviously all the geopolitical stuff that goes into effect for a lot of countries at the start of the year as well. So just to help us get started, though, like sort of just starting at a bigger picture or higher level, what do you think organizations should be doing to prioritize as they plan for their digital transformation and ERP implementations for 2025? So in other words, how do they, there's so many things you could be doing right now. We could all be implementing tons of new technologies, and we could be trying to boil the ocean and just going, doubling down on technology initiatives. But how do we realistically get started on that and make sure that we are getting started in a way that's aligned with our goals and objectives as a company?
Well, I think you said it when you said boil the ocean. A lot of organizations decide that, yes, this is the year we're going to embark on all of these digital strategies that we've been discussing over the last couple of years, possibly couple of decades. And it begins with organizational alignment. The digital transformation is made up of people, process, and technology, right? And very often technology projects are embarked upon for the sake of the technology, and it very often doesn't take into account the people side of the equation, the process side of the equation. Process side of the equation is really what is going to affect and improve our business processes going forward. And so taking a look at where current systems and current processes kind of come together and are not working well, you need to identify those gaps, figure out exactly how you're going to approach it as both an executive team and then all the way down through the organization to manage the processes that you want to improve and move into a new way of operating. That requires a very introspective view of the organization. We call that loosely executive alignment, but it's alignment of the whole organization around a move forward strategy that doesn't include boiling the ocean. It includes, in some cases, spot replacement of technology, but very often you have to look at the overall business as a whole and your business planning for the next 3 to 5 years, and pulling the planning together. And so we refer to this as kind of a phase zero approach. You're looking at both the people, process, and technologies in alignment with your business planning as in many cases, a 3 to 6 month view of how are we going to prepare the organization to move forward in a measurable and considerable way. You've seen that a lot with many of our clients. Very often when people don't go through that phase zero and that preparation, organizational prep, then it is a recipe for failure.
Yeah, largely because you don't get the alignment between whatever the overall strategy is of the organization and the digital transformation or ERP project. It's easy to just sort of focus on the technology, the shiny object, and just jump in and start deploying it. But if you don't take the time to do that phase zero, you end up usually getting a disconnect between what the strategy is of the company and the actual initiative. And so it's a way to sort of help bridge that gap and give you a foundation or a blueprint for deploying and pursuing technology in a way that aligns with your goals and objectives. So what are some good ways that you've seen organizations align their digital transformation goals with their broader business goals and objectives in the new year?
Well, I'm a big believer in the business plan. So many organizations just really take the time to get down to what is our strategic plan. How do we put that together from both a budget and a deployment standpoint? What is it going to take from a resource perspective? How many people are we going to tap within our organization to move this initiative forward? What is the total cost of ownership? And how do we measure that total cost of ownership against the return on investment? So nothing measured, nothing gained. If you don't upfront put together that comprehensive business plan as a part of any initiative, you're not going to know exactly who to look for on the technology side for the right solution for your organization. And you're not going to know exactly how much it's going to cost you and how many people, how many resources you're going to need in addition to the people that you have, or how can your internal team and your wicked smart people, as one of my Massachusetts friends said the other day, contribute to the program in a way that is going to be meaningful all the way throughout without overwhelming them, right? So it really takes that circumspect view of how are we going to move forward, what are we going to look at, how are we going to make it happen all the way along.
Yeah, makes total sense. I want to turn to the audience real quickly and just say hello to a few people that have chimed in with their location. Darian on LinkedIn says, good morning. Derek is joining from Dallas, Texas. Thanks for being here, Derek. C. Lynch is here from Plymouth, Massachusetts. So speaking of Massachusetts, I've got at least one person here from that region that might understand the wicked smart comment better than most.
Chris would understand that.
Yes. Yep. And then just not to get political here, but Rasim on YouTube says, I have hope for a second Trump period, less interest, more work. But the reason I wanted to bring up the part two of this comment is he has a strong relationship with tech bros. So it will be interesting to see how, not just in the United States, but other parts of the world, as geopolitical stuff shifts, how does that affect the technology world? How does that affect enterprise tech and digital transformations in general? That'll be interesting to watch here in the coming months in the coming year. But you mentioned before, Greg, you talked about this phase zero concept, and you talked about how phase zero is a way to mitigate against the risk of failure. It doesn't guarantee you're not going to fail, but it certainly gives you better odds than if you don't do a phase zero. Could you maybe help us explain why that is? Why is phase zero so important to mitigating the risk of failure? And more importantly, how is phase zero so important to ensuring that you can be successful in your project?
Sure. A lot of people, a lot of organizations, which are people, really just don't even understand exactly what they look like from a readiness perspective. And so phase zero allows us to step back just a little bit and really understand what is the capacity of our organization, of our people, to undergo the amount of change that we're going to be asking for in both a technical and a process development of a digital transformation. And there are two types of digital transformations. You can talk about a digital transformation with a capital T, as I like to say. So the digital transformation with a capital T, you're looking really mostly at a technology change. And so you're jumping in with perhaps an ERP vendor and you're going straight forward, and you're essentially, in my mind, jumping off of a cliff into, we're going to go straight forward into implementation once we decide exactly who we're going to use for the ERP. That doesn't take into account anything that's going on within your organization, within your four walls, or your multiple walls, in terms of the people side of change. How are they going to react? How are they going to go along with the program? How is our process going to change to adapt to new technologies, or vice versa? How are we going to keep some of the technologies that we have in place that we can't replace right now, and sequence around them and with them to get the overall digital enterprise operations intact and moving forward? So there are so many little nuances that come into this as you're embarking on the whole technology change, that if you don't spend that upfront phase zero piece in really understanding where you're going to run into pitfalls, you're going to run into pitfalls. So, that's just one of the things that's overlooked in many cases. You just jump right in and go forward. And that's where we very often run into very, very great client partners that say, yeah, we started on this in the wrong way. Can we back up a little bit and restart in the right way? And we are seeing that all the time.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, and I agree with you. We've had a lot of clients, a number of clients over the years that have asked us to help them sort of back up and take a step back, and not to slow things down necessarily, but just to grease the wheels. I mean, really what you need to do at times is sometimes you get so much momentum going on these projects, especially when you start getting in the technical consultants and they just start designing and testing and building stuff. There's always plenty of work to do. Regardless of whether or not you're going the right direction, there's always plenty of work you could be doing. So it's easy to get caught up in all that and sort of lose sight of what it is you're trying to accomplish and what you want to be when you grow up with your business processes, how you want to be organized, how you want to change people's jobs, all that stuff. And so I guess long way of saying it's really never too late to start phase zero, is it? Even if you're midstream, there can be value, maybe not in pausing completely necessarily, although some organizations we work with have put a complete timeout on the project to sort of get their ducks in a row. But even if you don't do that, even if you're still keeping the project moving, you could sort of back up and in parallel do some of this phase zero stuff to help you pivot and redirect the direction you're going with the project. Is that something you see as well?
Absolutely. We have a very great client and a partner that's been with us for many years now. And we completed the implementation of a new system, new ERP system. We are now going back through and we did process aligning. We're doing process management now and getting to process optimization. And part of the process optimization work is really just tying back the benefits that are being received now in working with the new system and tying those to, the implementation of the new system has given us certain benefits, but we didn't recognize what those benefits were because we never measured how we were doing things before. Mm. So that process mapping and then tying that or aligning it with the benefits that have been received by something that should have been done up front, but now it's being done after the implementation, And it's actually producing great results because now the executive team and the board are looking at some of the things that are saving, frankly, millions of dollars, avoiding a lot of risk in terms of the technology changes and the transformation that's already occurred. But we're doing it in arrears. We're doing it after the fact. So yeah, any point along the journey, phase zero can come back into play for sure. But it's absolutely best to do it up front.
Yeah. So if you're just getting started on your project now, we wouldn't suggest just go ahead and get started and do phase zero later. If you can do phase zero now before you get started, that's obviously the ideal scenario. But if you didn't, if you're already midstream and you've already gotten through a certain part of the project, it can be super beneficial to at least cherry pick some pieces of what you might do in phase zero to incorporate that into your overall plan. There's some interesting audience comments here and questions. First of all, William joining from LinkedIn says, "Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here, William." And then X Devet from South Africa is here, and X has a point here or a comment. "Great time for businesses in South Africa to consider transformative drives as the upswing in the economy is foundation to link an emerging market with the world." So back to the point of, you kind of have to look at what is happening with your business and with the economy in general, and how can you take this phase zero, the planning concept and the whole digital transformation strategy you pursue, how can you take that and apply that in a way that takes into account some of these macro external factors, as well as obviously the internal strategy that you're pursuing. But here's a question I want to get to that sort of segues into some other questions I have. This is from William on LinkedIn. William says, "What kind of tools are there or could there be to ensure phase zero is done thoroughly and smoothly?" So could you walk us through, the tools and or just the high level approach or some of the
Sure.
pieces? I know we've got a whole PowerPoint deck that we dive into with clients to really unpack this concept in a bit more detail. And it's hard. We're consultants, so you and I might have a little trouble unpacking this verbally instead of having our PowerPoint to fall back on. But could you maybe just summarize some of the components of phase zero or some of the things to be thinking about as we think about phase zero?
Yeah, there are two ways to approach this, right? You can do this internally, and certainly your bright people, your wicked smart people, and the teams that you put together for transformation can really develop an assessment of the organization from both a technical standpoint and a process standpoint. People readiness, understanding, where people sit, how many people would be needed for the initiative that we're about to embark on, budgets, finance, all of that stuff can be pulled together internally. At third stage, we use a series of tools and methodologies that are really just very well outlined in what we call the pre-launch checklist. So on our website, you can go in, you can pull down the pre-launch checklist. That'll get you started in a very great way in terms of kind of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps that should be taken in order to really understand where you need to be as an organization to get to where you want to go. Begin with the end in mind, right? So what do we want this to look like at the end? And how do we get there? And then just back into everything that's going to make that happen. With us, we do bring these proprietary tools to understand exactly what the organization is capable of from a people standpoint. We have a number of surveys and executive alignment workshops that we pursue to understand and really quantify what the ability and the willingness to move forward in synchrony is all about. Likewise, we have tools that can actually dive into the technical aspects of the infrastructure, the number of systems that you have working, the interoperability of those systems, One of the other failure points, if you will, for digital transformations is the failure to properly manage data, right? So the data migration piece, the data understanding of the data and item and vendor master information, data cleansing, preparing the organization in that way to be able to move forward is something that many organizations can do internally, but it's better done with a third party coming in and actually providing an objective view of what is the real picture here and how can we help you in moving forward that data strategy and everything else that needs to come together.
Yeah. And I just popped up a QR code that you can use to download that pre-launch checklist from our website if you'd like. So just scan that.
Thanks, Eric.
You bet. I mean, you're doing all the talking, so I had time to go put up a QR code there for you to give everyone access to that. So hopefully that helps as you guys are scanning that, and I'll pop it back up again later too, because I'm going to take it down in a second to get to some more questions, but I'll put it back up in a few minutes. But I do want to get to a couple other questions here that we're getting a lot of questions now coming in, but here's one from X Devet again. How do we package big company transformation strategies for small to medium-sized companies that are highly dynamic and have smaller budgets? I think that's a great question. So how do we right size this whole phase zero concept to scale it up or down depending on how big we are and what our budget is and the scope of our project and all that good stuff?
I really love that question because think about this. I mean, if you're building a house, you're going to go to a general contractor or a builder or someone to help you understand exactly what kind of house you want to build, where you're going to put it, how you're going to go through the entire process of constructing that house. Doesn't matter if you're constructing a 2-bedroom bungalow or you're constructing, 15-room mansion, something like that. I see the phase zero in the same way. Scaling up, whether you've got, 3 people on your core team or you've got 30 people on your core team for the digital transformation that you're planning on embarking on. The phase zero approach may be shorter for a smaller organization and involve fewer people, but there really is a scale in that. And, the important point is not to avoid or forget that the upfront planning and the upfront, business case for doing this is the important thing. And it's even more important for smaller organizations that may have a limited budget, that may have limited capacity in terms of their people. Their people are not going to be participating in a full-scale implementation of new software that lets them take their day job and put it aside and do something on the implementation project teams for a year. That's not going to happen in a smaller organization. So it's even more critical for the smaller and mid-sized businesses to go through this process.
Right. Yeah.
What do you think, Eric? I mean, in terms of scale, time, size of the kind of the phase zero approach, I think you can scale it up and down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's easy to think, well, we're a smaller or mid-sized company, so it's not as important to us since we don't have the budget or whatever. But the way I'd look at it is actually phase zero is a time and budget saving initiative. It may sound like, in the short term on paper that you're spending more time and money that you don't necessarily have. But the reality is by investing that time and money in phase zero, you're going to make the actual meat of the execution of the implementation is going to be way more efficient, and you're going to have a lot less wasted money, a lot less wasted value because you've spent the time up front on phase zero. And so that actually speeds things up and saves money later on. So I would argue that the net benefit is positive, whether you're a small company or a large organization. Now, obviously, you don't want to get caught up in analysis paralysis and spend, months and years on phase 0 and never get to the actual implementation. And you don't want to do that either. You don't want to go to the other extreme, but you do want to spend a certain amount of time, for our clients, it could range anywhere from, you tell me, you know better than I do, but a small company might just be a few weeks of phase 0 planning, but a big company,
Sure.
We have some big companies where we might spend 4, 5, 6 months on phase 0. Sounds like a lot of time, but when you think of a 3-year project, 4-year project, 5-year project, whatever it is, you're sort of setting the tone and setting the trajectory for how that remainder is going to go and how efficient and effective you're going to be. So is that, are those numbers sound right to you as far as like the range of how long phase 0 typically takes, depending on the size of the company?
I think you hit it right on. It can be 3 weeks. It can be, 3 to 6 months. Very often it's 6 months on larger firms. You mentioned something about the cost. If you look at kind of the cost of a phase 0, it's not that expensive in terms of the whole organization and moving everything forward. You're not at this point buying software, entering into a subscription, implementing the software, but you're doing a lot of the upfront data cleansing. You're doing a lot of the upfront analysis of how are our teams going to come together, establishing governance, establishing all of those things that in jumping off the cliff and jumping in with a technology change, they go forward. Very often you end up stalling after 2 or 3 months of the implementation because your data is not cleansed. Your data is not ready to be migrated. Your people aren't available for testing processes. How many times have we seen that a phase 0 can actually reduce the overall implementation of an enterprise system by 10 to 15% easily. So if you've got a 12-month implementation at the end of your full analysis, everything else is moving forward, you can take 1 to 2 months off of that in putting together a phase 0 that's preparing the organization to move forward before you embark on the entire thing.
Yeah.
So very, very important in terms of cost savings. And then the time that's saved, if you can shave 1 to 2 months off of an implementation of a new ERP system, for example, that's tens, hundreds, perhaps even millions of dollars saved.
Yeah. So you compare that to the time and cost you spend up front on phase 0, and usually you can justify it by looking at the efficiency gains or the savings you have throughout the project, especially if you're a multinational, multi-site rollout of new technology. It's even more important, if you're trying to figure out how you're going to create a common operating model or common business processes or whatever the case may be. I'm here with Greg Benton. We're talking about how to get ready for digital transformation in 2025. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 204. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian and Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, an independent tech-agnostic digital transformation consulting firm. And the show is produced by Major Tom Productions. So thanks for being here today. We're here with Greg Benton. We're talking about how to get ready for digital transformation in 2025. Julio says, in reference to phase 0, understand planning without knowing how future state processes can be done. How can you plan just knowing current state processes? So in other words, if I know what technology we're going to be deploying as part of this digital transformation, I may not know all the details of how those future state business processes are going to work. So how do we bridge that gap between current state processes that we know we want to change, but plan in a way that gives us that blueprint to that foundation for building the technology to meet that future state?
Well, I think that that's a great comment. If you have the wherewithal as an organization to go through the entire current state, future state process mapping and management up front, that's great. Most organizations really just need to look at the current state and align that with what they expect in the future state. Very often, the software systems as well as the process changes themselves are going to come along with your plan for the digital transformation. So current state, understanding exactly how things work today is imperative so that that you can understand or see. I use understand too much. So that you can see exactly how we want to map that to what we're going to be doing in the future. The software, in some cases, may dictate that. In some cases, you may want to look at your smartest people, your wicked smart people internally and say, all right, this is the way that this maps out today. How can we improve that? How can we eliminate some of the roadblocks that we see in a given process and mitigate that with either software or even just changing the way that we do things? It's not always a software question. It's not always a technology question. Very often it's a way that we do things internally. And that introspective look at what your current processes are gives you the ammo to be able to really just judge how we're going to make changes happen.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we've seen that with many of our clients right now, that process mapping exercise that I was just describing that we're doing post implementation. Do that up front and do it along the way. To the point of the message that came across the screen, it really is important that you link your future expected processes to the current state. But the current state mapping is important.
Yeah, and when you're looking at the future state, you're obviously in phase 0 not going to get down to the granular screen by screen instructions on how to perform transactions. That's not the level of detail we're getting at in phase 0. Where we're getting at is more macro, looking at just in general, how are our processes going to work? How do we want them to look? And you start making decisions that if you don't make them early on in phase 0, it ends up slowing down the project and creating delays later on. So for example, if I'm a multinational organization and I've got a dozen different locations, let's just say, I may have acquired several of those dozen locations and they've got different ways of operating. And I'm using this project, or I want to use this project as a way to create standard processes across those dozen locations. So you want to take that time up front to figure out how are we going to change those 12 locations into one common set of business processes at that macro level. And that alone, even without getting down in the details of how you're going to do it and configure it in technology, even just making the macro decisions around how our processes are going to work, that just takes time. And that's where the internal alignment becomes so important. And you might as well, I hate to say slow things down, but you might as well work through that messy process of defining future state processes up front so that when you start deploying technology, things are more clear. So your technology consultants know exactly how they should be designing and building software. Your project team knows what the future state is going to look like, all that stuff.
You're exactly right. The way that these things come together, when we're talking about transformation, right? We've got an equation that we often cite, which is old processes plus new technology NT equals expensive old processes. That really just kind of refers to the whole process of improving things for your organization as you go through this digital transformation. Transformation is all about change, right? Transformation is current state to a future state that is much better optimized future state. So it's going to happen along the way. You have to have internal, people, your internal teams that are going to be dictating how this works, how this comes together. But it's an iterative process that goes along the whole linear transformation process. So I think that's a great question that was asked.
Yeah, absolutely. And shifting gears from business processes to data. Here's a question about, because you mentioned data before, and this is from Keith on LinkedIn. Keith asks the potentially controversial question. Data migration has been around for decades with well-structured procedures and established processes. What's the big deal? And how, more specifically, how is phase 0 and the stuff you're talking about, Greg, and all the planning work that should happen up front, how does or should data fit into that phase 0?
Well, I mentioned at the beginning, for the last 25 years, I've been working with especially ERP deployments and the strategies that go into those deployments. And probably 60% of the time, I agree with you, Keith, that was it Keith or Doug? Sorry. Keith. These have been established for a long time. It never fails. We get 2-3 months into an implementation and somebody says, you know what, our master data is really a mess. We just didn't realize. So now we've got to go back and we've got to cleanse things. And cleansing doesn't mean that scrubbing your data and so forth. It really means that you're normalizing your data so that you can put it into the new system. There are tools to help with that, but it doesn't happen overnight. And it doesn't happen, especially in some organizations with, 20-year-old and 40 different disparate sources of data within an organization, that it can all come together and all be nicely managed all the way through. It just doesn't happen that way. So phase 0 is a way to look at how do we clean house before we actually embark on this whole thing. So great question, Keith. I mean, it's not really a question, it's a statement. There are some great tools out there. Tons of them.
Yeah, and surprisingly, people, even though these tools and processes have been around for a while, as Keith mentions, organizations still oftentimes don't use them. So it's important to kind of figure that out too up front. And how are we going to clean our data? How are we going to map it to the new system? How are we going to migrate it? How are we going to handle master data management and governance, data governance longer term? You know, it sounds pretty simple, but a lot of these organizations out there don't do that or think through that until late in the project. And again, that causes delays because now all of a sudden we're thinking about data. We should have been thinking about it a long time ago, but we didn't. So now we're trying to figure out and scramble on how we're going to handle data migration and forget data governance. We don't have time to think about that. So we end up cleaning up data, moving it over, and then we don't have processes to support clean data longer term. So I'm oversimplifying what happens there oftentimes, but that is, you know, I don't know if you agree with that, Greg, but that's a lot of times what organizations do. They put it off as sort of an afterthought and then wonder why their project got delayed all because of data.
Or they put it in the hands of a systems integrator or a software vendor that says, we have these set of tools, we've got a factory, we've got a data migration factory. We'll just basically plug everything in to one side and pull it out of the other. Oh, wait, just a minute. Your data is, corrupt. You're missing fields in certain areas. Your units of measure are disparate across all of your global locations. Nobody tells you up front that these tools don't work unless everything is managed to go into the tools. So
right. Yeah. You go in with the
assumption
that
more.
the data is clean.
Yeah.
But it's usually not. But yeah, the SI is going to assume you've cleaned that data up and it's ready to go. And that becomes a blind spot in the projects oftentimes.
Well, in fact, if you look at contractually, it's always the organization's obligation to have clean data. And very rarely. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, that's good stuff. Now, here's a question. I missed this in the feed or in the thread earlier, but I want to come back to this point because I think this is an excellent question. This is from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, so we were talking earlier about how it's better late than never to do phase zero. If you can do it up front, if you haven't started your project yet, it's best to do phase zero now. But even if you are midstream and you haven't done this phase zero stuff, it can be of huge value to either slow things down, pause, and revisit some of those phase zero activities, or at the very least do some things in parallel while the project continues. But when we look at those sorts of projects that are midstream, what are some of the most common signals that indicate a project needs to pause or revisit a phase zero strategy midstream? So, are there certain symptoms or signs that we see with our clients that would suggest that, hey, you didn't do phase zero and here are the symptoms, so let's go back and clean that stuff up and start to address some of that phase zero stuff? What are some of the symptoms we should be looking for?
Very much so. There's basically two different areas in my mind. So we see a lot of our clients actually get to a point in the implementation project where they are stalled out. They start doing unit testing and they start doing SIT, even further on in the project, getting to CRP. The testing is not showing that the software capabilities are aligning with the processes that they are supposed to be governing and managing. Requirements have not been properly gathered, and the requirements are not matching up with the software that's being implemented. And so the project kind of grinds to a halt. That happens very often. We get called in and back up, take a better stock of the requirements, looking at data cleansing, data management, and it's not a long pause, but very often it's a pause that is required so that they can go forward properly. The other one is what we've been talking about with the data migration. The data just isn't there to be migrated into the new system. It's going to cause a lot of the business processes that go on within an organization to slow down or halt because the data is just not ready to go into the new system. They have to revert to old ways of doing things in order to find materials in the warehouse, that type of thing. And that can drag an implementation. So those are the two areas. I would say data as well as business requirements matching up with the software that's being implemented are the two main things that I see. What do you see on that, Eric? Is that?
Well, another one is that I would add to that list is when you start to see the organizational and human resistance to change. So in other words, when you start to see that people are resisting change and people are starting to panic a little bit, they're starting to freak out a little bit because of all the changes that they're hearing about or the rumblings they're hearing about. When you start seeing that, that's usually a sign that you haven't done enough on the change management front, which is typically part of phase 0 as well. Typically in phase 0, you're also assessing the organization to figure out what that change strategy should be and what sort of tactics you should employ to ensure that you're addressing the human dimension of change. So that'd be another one I add to that list. And then
great add. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And then I guess another one too, that sort of popped in my mind as you were saying that is another symptom is oftentimes when there's a lot of uncertainty or lack of clarity around, I'd say it's sort of the architecture and decommissioning approach to technology. So in other words, you've got these legacy systems. We don't really know what's going to happen to them. Are we going to pull the data out of them and replace them? Is that in scope to get rid of that system? How are we going to get rid of the system? Or are we going to keep it and we're going to integrate it to the core, new technology stack that we're deploying? If so, how are we going to do that? So a lot of times you start to, if you can't answer those questions, that's a good sign that you should be having a clear, technology plan, not just for deploying new technology, but how you're going to address decommissioning old systems or integrating legacy systems where you need to. So all that stuff can slow things down or speed things up depending on.
Great point.
Yeah. And just a follow up here from Julio.
I mean, you hit on the one that I missed in the very beginning, the organizational change, the people part. If you run into resistance, halfway through a project, that can kill a project. You're going to have people that are reverting to old processes. They're refusing to participate on project teams. They're being overwhelmed because they're being asked to do their day job as well as participate on the project team. Project team has, been demanding a lot of time over an extended period of time, and projects just grind to a halt. So, I mean, you got to keep the business running, right? So that's what you prevent up front with that, beginning with the organizational change kind of approach to phase 0 and getting the people part of the equation in line as well. Yeah. Good point here.
Yeah. I think you were just setting me up so that you're kind of leaving that for me, the softball there for me to comment on there.
No. You hit that out of the park on your own.
So what about, here's an interesting question. And we haven't talked a lot. You mentioned it a couple times, but we haven't gone into this in a lot of detail yet, Greg. But this is from Dennis on YouTube. Dennis says, how do you help organizations understand or recognize if the technology implementation team measures up to the tasks? And I might add to that too. How do you know if you have enough how do you know that you have the right team in place? Not just the skills, but also the number of people or the capacity you need on the project. How do you assess that, and how does that fit into phase 0?
Well, that is a bit of a iterative process, and it's a great question because the whether you've got a technical implementation team that is a third party that is outside, that is coming in as a consulting organization, or it's also your internal people, it really requires taking a look at what we call a program management level. So program management is established so that anybody that's working on the project, the PM, everyone else associated with the implementation project is being evaluated all the time. is everyone capable of carrying their weight in terms of the implementation process? Do they have the right credentials, the right acumen to be able to pull this forward? Are the people on the client side of the equation able to put in enough time? Or do we need to find some backfill, or do we need to find some additional resources to pull in to help the implementation team move forward? And that's the program management discipline that we put on top of the overall project. SIs, systems integrators, absolutely want a software system that they are very adept at putting in place from a technical standpoint, putting it in place, moving on. And they're very, very bad at self-governing. So if somebody is just not carrying their weight in terms of the project team, very seldom will the systems integrator say, hey, you know what? Marcus is not carrying his weight, so we're going to replace him. They're not very good at that at all. And the transition is not very smooth. Very often it becomes almost, it's a catastrophic thing. We realize that Marcus is not carrying his weight. We need to replace him. So we're going to let him go and bring somebody else in, but there's a gap, right? So the program management of the overall kind of governance of the entire thing, the entire digital transformation, needs to happen at a higher level than just the project team level. And that's how you assure that you've got everybody participating on both sides, on the client side, on the technical implementation team side, all the way through. So bless you.
Thank you. Yeah, my allergies are attacking me right as we're wrapping up here. But so I guess what I'm going to pop up here on the screen again, the pre-launch checklist. So I encourage everyone who's watching this podcast on one of the visual platforms, I encourage you to scan the QR code. And if you're on the audio only platform, we'll include a link in the show notes below. But while I leave this up on the screen for the audience to scan here, Greg, we've covered a lot of ground here today as far as all the different dimensions or some of the different dimensions of phase zero and how to plan for digital transformation in the new year. And it's a lot of stuff, but if we were to sort of boil it down even more, if you were to summarize, the ways to just get started on phase zero, what would some of the, couple points you leave us with as a takeaway?
Business case development. So you need to understand how you can align your technology goals with your business strategy, right? As an organization. Executive alignment. So really just from the top down, getting buy-in to move forward with the entire project. So those two things, I think, are really kind of the first two pieces that you have to put in place in order to move forward with the rest of it. The business case is important because not only do you determine exactly what the budget is going to be, you get permission from the board, from the rest of the organization to move forward in this way. You also have the resources that are allocated for it, but it also allows you to measure it at the end. So the promise has to be there that we are going to take what we have today, we're going to look at it from a business case standpoint, and then we're going to measure it at the end and see how we did. And I think that's the most important part of getting started.
Yeah.
How would you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the requirements and the alignment, I think those are, or I'm sorry, the business case and the alignment are really important because that sort of gives you that you're sort of starting at the highest level. What is our strategy? What are we trying to accomplish with this transformation? Business case obviously quantifies some of that intangible or tangible stuff. And then from there, you can start to build on and layer on some of the other things that we've talked about, like the business processes and requirements and even the change strategy. What's the change strategy given now that we fully understand what our overall direction is? Certainly the architecture and data integration plan, all that stuff can come later. But I agree with you that internal alignment, getting on the same page with what this project is, what it means to the organization, and how, what are those high level governing principles for the project, and how does that translate into a business case that we can manage to the cost and also manage to the benefits of what we expect to get out of it. All right. Thank you, Greg. Great conversation. And thank you to the audience for the great questions that you all had. Some really insightful comments and questions there. So really appreciate that. We've got some more to unpack and debrief on here as it relates to that interview. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 204. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. And Darian, we just had Greg on the show. We talked about planning for digital transformations in 2025 and beyond. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from the interview?
Yeah, Greg is always a great guest to have on, like you said earlier. But one thing I found really interesting was how Phase Zero not only sets the stage for success, but also acts as kind of a safeguard against potential mid-project derailments, which I feel like when a organization goes through Phase Zero, hopefully they feel a little bit of relief knowing that. But with that, are there any industries or types of businesses where Phase Zero might look significantly different from the typical Phase Zero you guys were talking about?
I don't know if it's by industry. I wouldn't say by industry it's necessarily going to look differently, but I do think the bigger variables of what might differ for different companies would be the size of the organization, which we talked about with Greg. It would also be, we didn't talk a lot about this with Greg, although I think we sort of alluded to it in passing, but the complexity of the organization. If you're a big, diverse, complex organization and you have multiple locations and multiple ways of doing processes and multiple systems and things like that, that just adds exponentially to the amount of complexity that you're going to have in your digital transformation. And that adds to the importance of Phase Zero. doing that implementation readiness and planning up front. I mean, it's important no matter what, but it's even more so for the more complex companies. So I'd look at complexity and scale as the two big variables of how, the things that would drive what your phase zero looks like.
Yeah, that would make sense. And kind of a follow-up question to that. So let's say if an organization is smaller, does that mean that a shorter, more focused phase zero has proved more effective compared to a comprehensive approach that maybe a bigger, larger organization would do better with? Or where do you see for shorter, more focused phase zeros, are those effective anywhere? Or is it more so everybody should do comprehensive?
Yeah, I think you have to size it and scale it for you. So you as an organization. So if you look at two extreme examples, let's just look at a smaller organization that's going to deploy a new ERP system. Let's just say in 12 months, that's their timeline. And then you've got a big multinational organization. They're 100 billion in revenue. They've got 30 locations throughout the world. They might have a 5 or 7 year ERP implementation. Obviously, those are two very different phase zeros. I mean, it doesn't make sense to spend 6 months on phase zero if you have a 12-month implementation, but spending a month on phase zero makes a lot of sense. So if you spent, say, 4 or 5 weeks on this phase zero stuff up front, and then you get started on the 12-month implementation, that can make a lot of sense. And for that big multinational company that's embarking on a 5 to 7 year project, they've got a lot at stake. They're working through a lot of complexity, a lot of scale they've got to get through. So that might make a lot of sense to spend 6 months or 9 months on a phase zero, especially the more complicated or complex the company is. So I think that's the way to look at it. Is it's all relative to the size and scale of the project. But phase zero, either way, I think phase zero is extremely important. It's just a matter of how you right size it for your size and scale and complexity of organization and project.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question, something you guys talked about, what are some common pitfalls organizations face when they approach process optimization after implementation?
I'd say the biggest one is most companies don't do that. They just overlook it altogether. So, I mean, that's the biggest pitfall, is just not doing it. But of the companies that do, I'd say, I mean, first of all, you've exceeded the results of most organizations just by simply doing it. But as far as doing it wrong or some of the pitfalls that might come with that, I think it's easy to just let the tail wag the dog in some ways, in terms of the organization reverting back to the way it used to operate. So a lot of times, in other words, if we look at optimizing business processes and we go through a formal exercise of trying to figure out how we can optimize our processes post go live, oftentimes what happens is people want to revert back to the way they used to do it because they liked it better. They still aren't comfortable with the new way of doing things. So you just have to resist that temptation. And that's a common pitfall, is to want to let the organization revert back in the name of quote unquote optimization, even though that isn't really optimized. But in their minds, they might think that's optimization because it's what they know. So I think separating comfort and fear of change, separating that from true process optimization, those are two different things most of the time, and you have to make sure you don't confuse the two.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question here to follow up on a good point you guys made about data governance being overlooked. How do you help organizations build long-term processes to ensure data integrity after the transformation is complete?
Yeah, great question. We sort of skirted that, or we touched on it real briefly, but we didn't get into it in the interview. So it's a good follow-up question. So I think the key is to define what your data governance is going to look like long-term. So like having a master data management set of processes and procedures and roles and responsibilities, that's all stuff you have to design that process in organizations to support it going forward. And this is another one. A lot of times organizations don't do it. They spend all this time and money cleaning up data and getting it ready to move into the new system, but then they don't put the right processes and controls in place to ensure that the data doesn't just get corrupt again later on. Because usually it's human error and poor processes that cause data issues. It's usually, I mean, the data itself is not usually the problem. It's because a human did something to it that made it less effective. So I think, having that governance in place and knowing what it's going to look like in this post go live world is really important. In fact, what's even more effective is to implement and start executing some of those new data governance procedures and policies even before you go live with new technology, just to start to bake the behavior into the organization and to get people comfortable with it and to start to change the culture and the focus of the organization so that by the time you go live, you've already worked through those kinks and gotten people comfortable with it. So those are just some recommended points that come to mind.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's always a great interview with Greg. I thought the audience had some great questions today, but it was a good discussion to start 2025.
Yeah. And another discussion we want to have, the third kind of major discussion we want to have here in today's episode as it relates to planning for 2025 is understanding what some of those big up and coming ERP systems are. Not big necessarily, but just maybe lesser known, but viable ERP vendors that don't have the household names. You don't see their billboards up at airports or at golf tournaments or whatever, but they are good products. They've got good companies backing them, good teams backing them, decent sized install bases, all that stuff, but you may not have heard of these companies. So we want to share with you a YouTube clip that we posted recently where we talk about 5 up and coming ERP systems that you may not have heard of, but are very, we've seen them be very successful with our clients and with organizations throughout the world. So all that being said, let's roll this clip of 5 up and coming ERP systems that you should be aware of here in 2025.
The first software provider that you may not have heard if you're evaluating ERP systems is a company called Priority Software. And Priority Software is a company based out of Israel, and they have a really good market share and penetration in Israel, but they're not as well known throughout the world. However, they've got a really good product, especially for organizations that are in manufacturing, distribution, and retail, for example. And they have a very user-friendly interface. They have a lot of clients that are both in the small and mid-market as well as larger enterprises. So it's a product that can be right-sized for a smaller or mid-sized organization, but it's also a product that can scale for larger organizations as well. One of the unique factors of Priority Software that a lot of software vendors don't offer is this hybrid model or flexible deployment model to where you could deploy either cloud versions of the software or on-prem or some hybrid of both. And that's something that a lot of organizations find appealing if they're not fully sold on some of the inflexibilities of cloud options. They also provide a number of industry-tailored solutions too, so pre-configured solutions that are meant to fit the functionality and specific needs of manufacturers and distributors, for example. So if you are an industry that is served by Priority Software, chances are pretty high that the software is going to fit your needs potentially, and it's something you might want to consider. And then finally, Priority Software also provides some very good integration tools. So if you have third-party or legacy systems that you need to maintain for whatever reason, Priority Software has an open architecture with some open APIs that make it a little bit easier to integrate with other systems. So with all that being said, Priority Software is one of those softwares that you may want to consider when you're evaluating potential ERP systems. Next on our list of up-and-coming ERP systems is a product called Odoo. And you may have heard of Odoo because it's one of the leading ERP providers that's open source. They're based out of Europe, and they're spending heavily in R&D and marketing outside of Europe as well. Odoo was recently valued at $5 billion. They recently just got an infusion of cash from Google's parent company called Alphabet, as well as a number of other private equity firms. So they just got $500 million of investment from private equity. So they really are trying to scale up the company and go after SAP, and that is their designated target in going up market to provide a simpler, more cost-effective, and less complex and risky system that can compete with SAP. Now, the reason that we see organizations deploy Odoo is because it's a relatively simple system. It's not nearly as complex as some other systems in the marketplace. It's open source, meaning you can try the software for free. It's sort of that freemium model where you can try it up to a certain point and then you pay after that. It's cloud-based. It's something that you can grow into. So if you're a small business, it's something that you can slowly add on and build in new modules over time. And it's also relatively easy to use when you compare it to other systems in the market. Now, the other interesting thing about Odoo is that they've built quite a robust ecosystem around it. So you've got a lot of developers out there that know Odoo. It's a very passionate community. There are a lot of third-party apps that can be tied into Odoo. So there's a lot of different ways you can deploy Odoo, and it provides a lot of flexibility. So if you are looking for alternate options, maybe more cost-effective, simpler options than those normal household brand names, I encourage you to check out Odoo as one of those options. Next on our list of top up-and-coming ERP systems is a product called Acumatica. And Acumatica is a product that we see often in the manufacturing space as well as distribution and construction. So if you're in any sort of asset-intensive or manufacturing-intensive industry, it could be something that's a good fit that you might want to consider. It's a cloud-based system. It's actually grown a lot in the recent years, And it's a product that we're continuing to see more of over time, especially in the small and mid-market. One of the really appealing things about Acumatica, and one of the reasons why it's so well built for the mid-market, for the industries it serves, is because it has usage-based pricing, meaning that you pay for what you use rather than paying for a number of users or a number of modules. So it's more based on usage and volume transactions and that sort of thing, rather than some of the more costly or more complex pricing models that some of the other software vendors provide. So it's a good way to grow into the product without having to invest a ton of money upfront for functionality and usage that you're just simply not going to use. So if you're in the mid-market, if you're in manufacturing, distribution, construction, or one of the other industries that Acumatica serves, it may be worth checking out Acumatica as an emerging and up-and-coming ERP system. Next on our list of up-and-coming ERP systems is a product called NextWorld. And NextWorld is the one product on this list that isn't quite ready for market. It hasn't been introduced yet to the market, but it is still under development, and there's a lot of money behind the product. Now, just to give you some backdrop, and the reason why it's such an interesting and intriguing product is because it is founded by the daughter of John McVaney, who is the founder of JD Edwards, if you remember them. JD Edwards was acquired by Oracle decades ago, and he was actually involved in the startup of this organization, or this product as well, prior to his passing a few years ago. But his daughter runs the company now, and it's meant to be, it sounds like, somewhat of a JD Edwards version 2.0 for the modern world. And it sounds like they're going to be investing and focusing heavily on manufacturing and distribution, among other industries. It's meant to be a low-code, no-code type of development environment, so cloud-based with low-code, no-code, so they're really taking advantage of some of this modern technology out there, including artificial intelligence, too. They appear to be investing heavily in AI, and one of the good things about being a new product that has not been released yet is that they're not going through some of the growing pains that a lot of older legacy ERP providers are. They're able to build the foundation of their system on modern technology without having to worry about upgrading it to more modern infrastructures like a lot of software vendors are. So keep an eye out for NextWorld. It's something you may not be able to purchase here today at the time we're filming this video, but it is something that should be available in the market shortly. And if you're in the manufacturing or distribution space, it could be something that's a good fit for your organization. Next on our list of up-and-coming ERP systems is a product called Rapid. Now, Rapid is not your traditional ERP software provider. It's actually arguably not even an ERP system. But what it is more of a development platform to where you can create apps and workflows using a low-code, no-code environment. So this can be a great option for organizations that aren't quite ready to rip out all their legacy systems and replace them with back-office systems. This could be a good interim or hybrid solution that takes the best of what you have and allows you to build additional apps and workflows on top of the existing infrastructure you have in place. Now, what's really interesting about this product in this company is that it was founded by someone named Jan Baan, who is the founder of Baan Software, which was acquired by Infor. And since Jan Baan left Infor, he's started a couple other software companies, including this company called Rapid. So he's taking sort of the best of all of his lessons over 45 years of having been in the ERP space and building a new product on a cloud infrastructure that really reimagines what ERP systems can be. The product is built on the Google infrastructure, and it's been a partner of Google for quite a few years now. And the company is also investing heavily in AI for things like document processing and other functionality that's very specific to certain industries. So Rapid might be a really intriguing option, an alternative to your traditional ERP system, but it's still one of those products that a lot of people haven't heard of yet. So I hope this has given you a few ideas of different products you might want to look at in the marketplace. We, of course, are not affiliated with any of these software vendors, but we want to provide you some options and different systems that you might consider in addition to the household brand names and the systems you've already heard of. But I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments below. What other systems are out there that aren't household names but really well known, or systems that you've had good experience with? I'd love to see your comments below.
So that was a YouTube clip from my YouTube channel talking about up-and-coming ERP systems, 5 different ERP systems you should be aware of as you plan for new technology initiatives in 2025. And as you think about potentially branching out outside the common household names as it relates to ERP systems. So there's obviously just 5 we talked about here, but there's a lot more out there in the marketplace. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of viable enterprise tech providers that are focused on different niches and different geographies and have viable products and have financial backing and good customer install bases. But these were 5 that we tend to see a lot with our client base. But what were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that video, Darian?
Yeah, just to kind of expand on your point that you made there, one thing that really stood out to me was how often companies that are looking for, a new ERP system overlook these up and coming maybe ERP systems or smaller ERP systems to favor the more well-known household names, like you said. One thing you mentioned was that sometimes these emerging systems could actually be a much better fit for some companies, but they don't even get put on these companies' radars. So that's something that obviously we're trying to educate anybody who is looking for a system that you do have more options than just the household names. But why do you think that companies stick so closely to those brand names? And what advice would you give to businesses that are starting to explore some alternatives to the one they currently have?
Well, I think comfort is one of the reasons why companies stick to the brand names. I think there's just a comfort that goes along with the big install bases and the big brand recognition. And I think people oftentimes they feel safer, or they feel like it's a safer bet to go with a household name. But what we've seen is there's really not a correlation between success and failure versus brand name. So in other words, we don't look like, for example, I know some people would accuse me or Third Stage Consulting as a whole would accuse us of being biased against SAP, for example, because we do talk about failures in the SAP space. And when there's SAP failures, they're usually pretty big. They're pretty spectacular because they're big companies that have failed. So it has nothing to do with SAP. In most cases, it has to do with the fact that it's a big, massive, complicated company that's trying to deploy new technology. And when they fail, you hear about it. So reason I bring that up is because sometimes people would say, well, it sounds like SAP has a lot more failures than other ERP vendors. And I'd say absolutely not. I don't think they do. I think they're probably on par with, the average ERP vendor. The only difference is, they've got more customers. So by definition, they're probably going to have more failures. But as a failure rate to percentage of their customer install base, I haven't seen any data suggest there's a correlation between SAP versus Microsoft versus, Oracle or whatever, as far as percentage of customers that fail or have trouble with their projects. So getting back to your question, why do people feel comfortable? I think it's just because the name recognition, there's a perception that it's safer, it's less likely to fail because it's SAP or whatever, and that's just simply not true. That it's good or bad depending on how you look at it. So, and certainly the other factor here is that a lot of times companies just haven't heard of some of these different vendors. They just don't know that they exist, and some of them don't have big marketing budgets. Some of them intentionally don't spend a lot of money on marketing. They just rely on word of mouth or direct sales or whatever. So that's why we try to get the names out there, because there are really good options that just people oftentimes aren't aware of. So I think awareness is probably the even bigger challenge for some of these smaller ERP vendors, even more so than the comfort that people have with the big names.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. One other thing that really caught my attention throughout this video, though, was Priority Software's specifically there's hybrid deployment model, which is, the flexibility to choose between cloud, on-prem, or a mix of both. For businesses that are hesitant about fully committing to the cloud, this could obviously be a game changer for them or something that fits them very well. Can you elaborate on how this flexibility could benefit companies, especially those that are still in early stages of their digital transformation?
Yes. So there's a lot of companies out there that, for either regulatory purposes or their own internal purposes, don't want or can't have or aren't ready to move their data and their processes to the cloud. And it may not be, and usually it's not all or nothing. Usually it's parts of the organization aren't ready or can't, or there's certain pieces of data or systems that aren't ready for cloud for whatever reason. So I think it just opens up the possibilities in this interim phase we're in, where on one hand, the vendors are investing really heavily in cloud technologies and capabilities, largely because it's more profitable and the investors like it and their stock prices do better the more cloud revenue they can generate. So on one hand, you have vendors that are pushing really hard into the cloud, but then on the other hand, you have customers which are lagging behind. They're not as advanced, obviously, as a technology vendor, which you wouldn't expect them to be because they're not technology providers. So, I think this hybrid approach is a good way to bridge that gap and help ease organizations into the cloud rather than just sort of forcing a mass migration all at once.
Yeah, definitely a different approach from what we're seeing some of the bigger ERP software vendors take compared to, cutting off help from on-prem systems and, telling their customers that they need to go to the cloud. So this could definitely fit somebody that maybe is looking to do a hybrid model, like you just said. Another question, there's this growing trend that you said of increased investment in ERP systems like Odoo and Nexter. With such heavy funding, how do you think this will impact the innovation and scalability of these smaller ERP providers? And could they eventually challenge larger ERP vendors and create more competition in the market?
Yeah, and you actually bring up a really good point, which is the other advantage of considering these up and coming ERP systems is just because there's so many innovative companies out there, and the barriers to entry are getting lower for enterprise tech providers. I know I talked earlier about AI and how the barriers to entry are actually increasing in many ways, but in the enterprise tech space, at least for now, there's still relatively low barriers for entry to where it just creates a lot of innovation. So I think that's a big important point. But I think as far as whether or not some of these up and coming ERP vendors will become you didn't say threats, but challengers to some of the incumbents. I think that's very true, and I think it will happen. I think if you look at history in the ERP space, that's what happened. Certainly in the 90s, I know when I first started, I think by the time I started in consulting, SAP had already sort of taken over that top spot, in the ERP world. But shortly before that, while I was in grad school and even in college, I remember Bond was sort of the gold standard for ERP systems, and then Bond sort of faded away over time, and SAP came along. Oracle entered the enterprise tech space outside of just databases and provided ERP systems. Microsoft went out and acquired some ERP providers and rebranded it as Dynamics. So, the landscape, the competitive landscape changed a lot. But then you get into the 2000s, and then you get Workday that came along and disrupted the space. Salesforce, NetSuite came along in the early 2000s and disrupted the space. So, that's just sort of the cycle that the industry goes through. You get these no-name vendors that come out of nowhere. It's seemingly like Workday or NetSuite. Although, there's I won't get into the history of it, but it's a lot of the same inner circle of technology people that went off to start these companies. So they knew what they were doing and they had a lot of capital behind them, but still they were upstart vendors and providers. So I think that cycle can and should continue. I would hate to say that 10 or 20 years from now, it's going to be SAP, Oracle, Microsoft is the same big three. If we're still saying that in 10 years, I think that means we're probably stifling innovation and missing out on some opportunities to see other providers out there.
Yeah, good point. That definitely makes sense. I want to go to the last question that I have for you today as a follow-up to this video. As we look ahead, what's your vision for the future of ERP systems, especially as we see new vendors leveraging AI, like we talked about, open source frameworks and low-code platforms? How do these innovations shape the way businesses should be approaching their digital transformation strategies in the up-and-coming years?
I just think it creates a proliferation of more options and more competition, which overall is probably a good thing, but it can be overwhelming or daunting for an organization trying to figure out, what the best option or options are. So I think you certainly want to look at vendor viability and the long-term roadmap and stability of the company. That's important, but there's a lot of companies out there that are very stable, well-funded, good products, good teams, all that stuff. But again, back to your earlier point, you don't always hear about them. So that'd be some of my thoughts on how the ERP space evolves here in the coming years.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great advice for anybody looking or what's going to happen in the upcoming years here. But what a way to start 2025 with a lot of talk about what's going to happen in the future today.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you missed last week's episode too, we actually did a recap of 2024 and looked at the top 10 YouTube videos of 2024 in terms of the number of views and engagement that they got. So if you missed that one right at the start of the new year, be sure to check that one out. So that was episode 204, which was published last week. So be sure to check that one out as well. But yeah, great way to sort of settle into 2025 and look to the future of the year and sort of start with a fresh year. So I hope everyone so far is enjoying the new year and enjoyed the holidays and getting back in the swing of things here in January. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, Darian, for being here. Great job once again on this episode. And we'll see you next time on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Again, you can find past episodes and keep up with new ones at transformationgroundcontrol.com. New episodes every Wednesday, produced by Major Tom Productions and sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. Feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about Third Stage and how we can help you and your team and your project through its digital transformation initiative. So hope you have a great week. In the meantime, we'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.